The digital transition. The Digital Transition, a podcast series created to assist those tasked with implementing digital strategies, where we will share our knowledge and experiences to support you in your transition. Welcome to The Digital Transition, powered by Bond University's Building Information Modelling program. I'm your host, Nathan Hildebrandt, and today I'm talking with Don Cameron about the current state of BIM in Australia. But before I start my interview with Don, I need to talk to you about our exclusive sponsor. So Bond University are leading the way in BIM education in Australia through their Master of Building Information Modelling and Integrated Project Delivery course. They also offer micro-credentials as well. Now, these courses were the first and remain the only university courses to be formally accredited by Building Smart Australasia. And these courses were also recognised internationally with a special mention for leadership in Open BIM in education in the professional research category in the 2020 Building Smart International Awards. So head over to the Bond University website via the link in the show notes to learn more about their educational offerings. So Don, thanks very much for talking to us today, mate.
G'day. How are we, Nathan? Great to be back after all these years.
It's been a long time, mate. It's been 21 episodes since we last caught up. It was episode 28 when we kind of talked about Back to the Future and BIM, and all the way back in November 2020. And for those that haven't had a chance to listen to that podcast yet and have no idea who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. We'll go over some old ground there. I'm currently a director on the board of Building Smart, which is a role that I actually chair the international awards, the Australasian chapter and jury for that. So it's a great honour to be able to do that role. And I guess the benefit of that is actually seeing all the work that's going on around the world and the region. I'm currently basically last sort of 20 or so years I've been working mainly for building construction contractors on and mostly big jobs around the country, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and a little bit of time in Perth. And that's probably where I sort of cut my teeth is at Perth Children's Hospital with a couple of key guys in the industry. Really good experience that was. But yeah, that's me.
I like how you've kept it short and sweet tonight, mate.
What do you say? I normally ramble, do I?
Oh, I don't know if it's a ramble, but you normally put a little bit more life into it. Maybe we've worn you out already. It's too late in the evening. But the thing that I enjoy in getting you in and having a chat, and I know it's been a few years, which is kind of disappointing from my front, is because I think that in many ways both of us kind of have that capability, or we're both kind of happy to kind of be open with our expression and our true thoughts on BIM and the digital transition across the industry. As we talked about just before, a lot of time has passed since our last chat. I'll let you answer this one first, and then I'll kind of talk about what my thoughts are. But, since November 2020, do you think the industry has moved very far since then?
Ooh, start off with the difficult questions, eh? Okay.
Yeah, we've got to do that.
Really good one, I guess. I certainly think in some cases it's moved really well. Like what I think is interesting is, the Brisbane experience been going for, you recently celebrated the 10th year, and, thanks to the effort that you and the other members of the committee put in on that, I think it's a great focal point for BIM in southeast Queensland. And it's certainly a leading light of BIM exploration across the country, right? It was the first of the BIM, city BIMs. And it's still leading in my view, and the diversity of content that's presented at those things and the audience numbers that we see regularly attend at, I think that's one example of great development. I reckon, if I recall back to one of the first couple, there was really a handful of gurus in the room, rather than the wider audience. And now I think you see a really good cross-section of even government people that aren't on the tools, people that are project managers, people in construction, land survey, really across the board. So I think to me, you've seen great, much wider understanding. Certainly I was like thankfully we don't get any more what is BIM presentations.
Maybe we should again.
Maybe the next generation's ready for that. So that I think is one good example, but I guess it's also frustratingly slow in other areas, right? Where we expected, I suppose, government policy to drive a greater change and a greater adoption and a more uniform adoption across the industry. I think one good thing is for me anyway, from what I've seen in my observation on projects is pretty much it's modelling now, every discipline across the board. And in generally, I suppose in a lot of cases, it's pretty good, right? So that's one thing I think in the last 10 years is gone from being where it was certainly well less than 50% on projects now to being, I would have to say, it's rare that you would find, and it might only be a specific discipline that's more niche and boutique, that maybe where they haven't got the skill set to model and generate the requisite drawings from the model. So two examples I think we have come forward, and it's been obviously a hard road for a lot of people, but I don't think you'd turn up at any tier one organisation today and just say, oh yeah, I can draft really well. Whilst you might be gainfully employed drafting, and I'm not trying to just drafting. There's still a whole art of that part too. But I think there's been such a significant move to use of models, and the use of models, the software naturally has improved dramatically, right? I think that's the other thing. It's just a no-brainer now that the hardware and software piece for us it's solved from what I recall 10 years ago. Mostly, right? I see you shaking your head a little bit.
It's never totally solved, is it? The thing is that it's like everything. If it's almost like gluttony, right? If someone gives you something, you then want more automatically. There's never a satisfaction level with what we're achieving.
Exactly.
I think that's a really kind of optimistic look at where we're at, and I think that going back to your point about BIM, what I found kind of really enlightening with those events is that, we have Clay up there emceeing, the events, and the one question that I really appreciate that he asks most of the time is, is it your first BIM event? And to see half the audience nearly at every event putting their hand up is a huge shift. And in a dynamic way, because, prior to COVID, I reckon, had you asked that same question, I reckon I can remember probably when that question was probably asked, there was fewer hands going up.
Yes.
So it means that it's becoming more apparent to people and less of an echo chamber, I think, maybe those conversations.
Mainstream. Yeah, for sure. I think so. But I think that diversity of and like I was saying before, there's people there that aren't, intimately involved with BIM as such, but see it, coming into their world as a project manager or construction manager. So, yeah, great. And it is a little bit of an optimistic view in some respects, because there's other areas where I guess we probably both feel that we should be more advanced, right? Like those tools that we spoke about that have evolved significantly, where it's, you're seeing them everywhere now, digital tools in the construction industry. Is huge spend. There's a lot more products available around, field apps, all those kinds of things. And yet I think some of the basics are still a struggle, right? And stuff that I've been working on recently, a challenge to get just that, that next level of quality, particularly data, like and modeling and the use of it, right? The extended. So whilst people may be using models or creating and generating and authoring models, I think the challenge is where I think the problem really lies is the reuse of that information, the geometry and the data. There's not enough of that happening at the moment.
Now, I think it's a really interesting topic when we sit down and talk about the modelling. And, I began my modelling journey all the way back in 2003, 2004. So it's nearing 20 years where basically all my projects were delivered using modelling.
Yep.
And actually, as of this year, it's going on a decade where I actually had information embedded in my model which linked to my specification. So actually kind of taking that transition, because you're seeing on the ground that movement forward with people being able to actually model now and actually generate geometry.
Yeah.
Is it that we're sitting there and seeing that we need to just be a little bit more patient, and that the people that are now at that level that we were at a long time ago are going to then be, and I guess it comes back to the way I actually talk to people about how they implement BIM within their practice. I talk about you need to learn to model well first, get the geometry right. Once you've got the geometry right, then the next step is focusing on the information. Is that possibly what's going on?
I think, yeah, it's a complex situation, right? Because what you really had is this, in a way, a changing of the guard. There's an issue of people in the workforce, like all of us, right? Like they say, no one likes change, right? Except for a baby with a wet nappy. The issue,
that's a new one.
The issue, I think the issue is that, right? Like when people get into roles and the day-to-day grind, it's very hard to suddenly say, I'm going to adopt the next generation technology. So it's that transition of moving from, it was what I first experienced was the touch end of the drawing board into CAD and then into modelling. I think the beauty of now is that everyone at the base level now that's coming through the educational system is doing modelling, right? And entering the workforce, and they're the ones that are implementing the change within any organisations that don't recognise, what's happened. And hopefully, I think, again, though, this is where the problem with organisation, where I see a lot of challenges, is that organisations aren't recognising the possibilities of reworking their workflows. And like you mentioned before, like you were, more than 10 years ago, leveraging the model-based workflow to generate schedules and specifications and all of that, and making sure there's coherency in all the design documents, right? I think a lot of organisations still haven't recognised how fundamentally they could reorganise the way they work. I'm certainly not intimate with it, but from what I see, the outputs when, in a construction project, working for a contractor, there's still a lot of issues that would be solved significantly by just implementing what you just referred to.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I presented a new workflow where I actually built my specification online on an online platform and had it connected via URL to all the elements in my spec. And it's been something I've been wanting to play with and set up for like years, but I just haven't had the time to actually do it.
Yeah.
And I presented it to a couple of people, colleagues that I have over in North America, and they were just like, oh, wow. It's like, guys, this isn't rocket science. This is just really effective information management and connecting the dots, right? That's all that we need to do. It's what's missing. Now, we talked about BRISBIM, and the one thing that I think that was really interesting with the comments you made about that was the diversity. And one thing that I used to track quite a lot when I wasn't in the chairperson role, and I was doing sponsorship, was actually tracking the industry and the industry that the delegates came from, so that we could advise the sponsors the mixture of delegates that we had. And when BRISBIM first started, it was, I think, 50-60% attendance was by the architectural profession. So in terms of that, but the diversity of delegates now across all the spectrum of industries has switched and changed so much to be kind of more, I guess, more diluted in the sense that there's a more greater diversity.
Yep.
So it might be a task on my task list to go back and actually do a check and see how we're seeing the diversity across the attendees at BRISBIM, and maybe publish it up on LinkedIn just to talk about it.
That would be great, actually. I think it would really help people see, and certainly your sponsors will be interested in that type of information for sure.
It'd make an interesting difference. But moving on to the kind of, so it's great that for me, I'm struggling when I attend events. There's two reasons why people attend events these days, and one is to learn from a presentation.
Yep.
And secondly is to network and catch up with your peers. And the last 12 months has been great because we've been able to get back to almost, we'll call it business as usual, face-to-face events. And it's probably going on 14 months, I think, that the face-to-face stuff's kind of worked quite well. For me personally, across all of the myriad of events that I've attended, I think this is my point of disappointment. It almost seems as if the industry is kind of frozen. It hasn't really. I've been at conferences where the top people in BIM in Australia are presenting, and I feel like the messaging is still the same. And what's your thoughts on that as well? Have you felt that there's kind of been it's kind of almost stagnated here in Australia?
I think you could be right there. I guess it's probably could be a bit of a byproduct of a maturing industry, right? We're at that plateau level now but I would tend to agree with you that I think we see a lot of events where there seems to be the same pattern or the same content being regurgitated like I was saying, maybe part of that is in fact that the industry is a little bit more mature now, and it's not like new stuff coming out every quarter. But I do think there's probably an injection of new content or new players would be good and really helpful for industry. And I guess the other thing I think we need is a little bit more controversy, a little bit more, argument. And I think there's too much of a fear of not being able to say what you think you need to say. There's too much, I suppose, concern perhaps about clients, agencies and all that. But I guess it's like anything. It's like a human individual, right? Unless you're prepared to expose yourself to criticism, you're not going to grow. And I think maybe that could be part of why we're not seeing enough. And there's also obviously, thing like the digital twin piece that's probably distracted people to some extent, like where that's the new bandwagon rolling into town, and obviously a lot of interest in that. And it does hold great promise, but I do think, probably what we've been talking about and our interest in, BIM and digital from a built environment perspective, I think there's still a lot of work to be done in making it more business as usual. Like I was saying, the reuse of that modeling, and two things spring to mind so obviously sustainability is a huge issue at the moment, right? Mm-hmm. And looking at, things like ISCA ratings of projects, which I've worked on, and Green Star, for example, and the data gathering that those two formats require in order to achieve compliance for either of those two rating systems is significant. And in a lot of cases, it's hugely manual. Whereas we all know, like, the data exists. It's just, so how do we enable and how do we leverage that next generation and really make BIM start paying for itself, right?
Yeah, I've been, there's two things. So maybe there's a reason why we're not seeing these new age presentations or these further developments, because possibly they're in progress.
Maybe, yes. Good point.
And the last COVID might have slowed progress down, and we know that most good projects take several years to come to fruition. It's not something that happens overnight. Maybe that's why there's a bit of dormancy right now.
I think you could be right. There's clearly, from my knowledge of speaking to people around the country on projects, guys that I've used to work with in Melbourne that are now working, say, in Sydney, I think we are seeing that grappling with new ways and people doing it. There's obviously, I think the other point could be is that there's a lot of projects that are really big and are running for like 4 to 5 years. So we possibly, and you know what it's like now with the restrictions on what you can talk about, perhaps that's why we're not getting that
refresh of information.
Yeah.
And it's kind of timely in some ways that the Queensland government are currently doing their review on their digital enablement policy. And, at the last Brisbane event, we had grant from I can't remember the name of the government organisation. It used to be DILGIP, but basically the government agency that's responsible for the that digital enablement policy. And it's timely that is being reviewed. And originally, when that policy was released in November 2018, there was obviously the talk that all projects by 2023 would essentially be kind of delivered using BIM processes in line with that standard. I'm on the fence with this one. Like, I kind of feel as if the policy's kind of driven some forward movement.
Yep.
But it kind of hasn't had that. I don't know whether or not that needed more carrot or more stick. I think that what's concerned me the most in Queensland is that the government really hasn't taken it seriously and actually provided a team of people to actually enable this to be successful. It's always been kind of a 1 or a 1.5 or a one half an FTE equivalent person trying to drive this agenda to try and, if there was a team behind it, like you look at the investment by Transport for New South Wales or the investment in VDAS.
Very significant, yes.
Substantial investments.
And I guess a really good point, like even if you just took Transport for New South Wales by itself, there's clearly far more people directly involved in digital engineering and their digital engineering group. than the rest of any government department, all the government departments combined in Queensland. So it is strange that there hasn't been more engagement or adoption. I'm not sure why. I guess, like you say, we don't know whether it's stick or carrot. I think there's a lot of projects coming up, like with the Olympics, with the capital expansion, the health program that they're running. We would expect, obviously, that there's going to be significant requirements for those projects, as it sensibly should be for that kind of really big dollar projects. But yeah, it's interesting that, and Victoria certainly really leaped ahead, whereas they were lagging probably 5-10 years ago. Now I feel that they seem to be more as a collective in terms of government. They seem to have really grabbed the bull by the horns, and there's some really good initiatives, as I understand it, that are happening down there.
They have driven it. It was one of those things where it was kind of almost like a slow start, because they started off with a VDAS as a position, and it wasn't policy. It wasn't actually kind of mandated at that policy level. And I, in all honesty, I actually think that the way in which the policy is written here in Queensland is actually really positive.
Yes, it absolutely is. It's right. It's the right policy. It's implementation that's the issue, isn't it?
The implementation, I think, has been the killer. And I just wish it's that one thing where you kind of feel like I kind of feel like the policy in some ways has failed to deliver against what the expectations were.
Yeah.
Only because, and I think this is the only reason, because there was never a true investment by the Queensland government in actually helping it succeed, in terms of having the people on the ground to assist each of the agencies to actually deliver against it.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you that it would have certainly made a big difference, I think, in terms of understanding the implications, as for any department suddenly to be thrust in and new policy that is completely alien to them, right? But if it was translated by people from their area of expertise, perhaps, or whatever department they were in, I think, we would have had much greater traction. So, look, those people don't grow on trees either, though. That, I think, could have been a challenge, is to even find people for each department to have, or maybe that get consultants, I guess. But even the consulting field in this country is challenged really by the lack of skilled people that have that broader expertise on how to implement digital in an organisation, right? Not IT. It's more subtle than that. It's how do you transition an organisation to use digital information, anything we're familiar with in terms of built environment. Like I say, I see the challenges in the construction industry, right? There's tools that we all know about. I won't name any names here, but there's some great products that do some great stuff in respect of managing field issues and things like that, and the technology in the construction equipment space, with particularly in terms of geospatial stuff, has been phenomenal. Like some awesome products that have come out of, again, I won't mention any brand names, but all of those, all the geospatial companies have introduced some significantly powerful products over the last 10 years that have really improved the game. But again, connecting all that together is still a challenge, right? There's still these piles of data sitting around, and obviously each one of those vendors has still also got their own proprietary CDEs or data systems. But the challenge is, again, like I say, going back to the thing is, how does an organisation confront this issue of digitization, or whatever you want to call it, and make it work for them? How do they transition to the data piece, to asset management, leverage all of that?
Well, I actually think that the biggest challenge is, and I've seen it on several government agency projects where, they're asking for placeholders for data.
Yep.
And I know that some of these projects have very, very long lead times. Mm-hmm. So you don't know what you don't know or you don't know. But I want to use an analogy that I used in the presentation at Future Infrastructure Summit. And I think it's something that's really important for people to consider when they're talking about what data they need, and even models, right? And we won't even, if I start on that journey, that'll be an interesting one. But, Don, if you go to a restaurant, do you order the whole menu? just in case?
Oh, sometimes I've been tempted.
Yeah,
but I got my pockets aren't that deep. Yeah, I know what you mean.
But your pockets aren't that deep, but then your stomach isn't big enough to actually take all of that information, take all that food in, right?
Yeah.
Now, you might be cheeky one night and you might go, I'll order an entree just in case, or a dessert, but I
always
think
order dessert, mate. That's my recommendation.
I think the problem we've got is that everyone, instead of actually investing in sitting down with the people and asking them what they really need,
yes,
they're kind of saying, well, I just need to have this just in case. And now people forget that creating information and creating data, managing it costs money.
Yep.
Whereas we don't see a third cross river rail tunnel just in case, do we? There's so much focus on being very prescriptive of what physical asset they need delivered, but there still isn't that focus on digital, and it's that whole thing of just in case. Whereas I think the challenge is that they need to converse with asset management or facility management experts.
Yep.
They need to be part of the conversation. And yes, there could be this scenario saying, well, the people that manage this asset don't exist yet because their roles don't exist because the asset doesn't there. Yes. So then they're going to say, well, we can't ask anyone until it's right near the end. But why can't there be those experts as subject matter experts as part of these conversations rather than just people that are digital advisory agencies coming in and going, no, if we're not going to have anyone to talk to, we're just going to plug this. We're just going to put placeholders in.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously agree. It's a continual frustration of mine. We work on projects and you have that issue where it just, give me everything, even if it's not needed. I think part of the problem is what we referred to earlier is the agencies or the clients or people not actually knowing what they want because it's unfamiliar territory for them. And so the consultants struggle to whittle it down, and in which case the easiest answer is always just ask for everything, right? But particularly if there's no, at that point in proceedings when potentially it's just expressions of interest or requests for tender, creating all this, all the project information set, there's no, I think what I've seen happen in the past is exactly that, right? So people would put together the request for tender proposals and the project requirements, put them out in the market comes back, and then there's a discussion around the BIM costs, and it's usually significant because it's been broken out and no one's quite sure exactly what it could mean because it's a long list.
Yep.
And then it can quite often be deleted because a project manager or a reviewer doesn't see the value in it and doesn't know. And whereas perhaps if it was a more simpler arrangement or a set of requirements, it would happen and it would, some other projects would have continued to have a BIM implementation rather than have it, ripped out of the contract early on. And half the issue as well is contractors see the complexity of it and look at their subcontractors or trade partners and recognise that it would be a real challenge to implement that, right?
So they don't have the capability.
Yeah.
Industry doesn't have the capability to deliver.
It's still an issue, right?
Do you think that maybe, and this is a conversation I think I've had with several people recently, is this so difficult because people are fixated on BIM, right? And they're not fixated on information. So other conversations I've had with people, the other information deliverables are buried in a normal traditional specification or a terms of reference, and they're all listed there. Or in the case of a specification, they're buried in every single trade section. So all the certificates, all the tests, all of the samples, which really are just pieces of information.
Yes.
Is the reason why we're struggling to make this transition is because people see BIM is completely separate to it, and why if we actually just combine it as just what information do I need to deliver it, then we might actually see a bit more coherence.
100%, I would, definitely agree. It is part of the problem is BIM is too technical, and some people love that, right, and they leverage it for their own ends, right? But certainly And that puts people off, right, in terms of engaging. So I think absolutely, if people focus on the information piece and the streamlining and management of that information, without question, the rest will flow naturally, right? But the issue I think what I've seen on projects too is even if there is a CDE, there's still a requirement for PDFs, which is fine, right? But the linkage between all of that is all disconnected. So there is, at the moment, we're not leveraging any savings in process, right? And the same with the data, right? And so instead of it being acceptable to have the data presented in some sort of digital platform, there's obviously some key examples that we all know about where that does happen, and certain organizations have become sophisticated in sort of room management software, if I can call it that. Great. And there's good outcomes, but I think there's nearly not enough leveraging of that way of thinking about things. There's still this requirement. PDF report, and that same table, instead of being digital, is buried in a PDF report that just gets shared on an electronic document management system.
But maybe that's all that people need. See, the thing is that like when we sit in our shoes and we kind of see where we should be or where we think we should be with the future, because we play and dabble with technology every day. We see the inefficiencies of how every project's delivered and kind of envisage how it could be done better.
Yeah.
Are we? And I often go back to a presentation I did at a conference in Budapest back in 2016, where I presented on a topic, and I presented at the same conference in 2014. It was my first ever international presentation, and I second top scored. Come back in 2016 and run a workshop, and it was on my latest research and development of how I was doing certain processes, and the marks that I got from that year were substantially lower. So I walked away from that and tried to figure out exactly in my head why the scores were so different.
Yep.
And I started to figure it out. It's because the research, the presentation that I put forward was of great interest to me because it was something that I was working on right then in terms of cutting edge stuff that I was doing.
Yep.
But the relevance to the audience at the time was completely irrelevant because they're 4 or 5 years behind, and the type of issues that they're facing within their organization are completely different. So they're trying to deal with other little issues.
Yes.
And they can't even imagine themselves doing the processes that I am talking about and sharing. They're kind of looking at it and going, well, this is meaningless to me. I can't even use this in my business because I need to take another 20 steps before I get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that something that maybe you and I have to consider as well in our kind of critiques of this, in the sense of thinking the way in which we're seeing things is so strategically into the future that we're going to get frustrated by waiting for the rest of the world to see what we can see?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm certainly frustrated. That's what you mean. And I think there's definitely that situation. It's probably like a lot of people I know look at the digital twin piece and say that same sort of thing, right? And I guess I feel the same way in some respects. The digital twin, we're not even walking, we're not even barely crawling yet, and some people want to run. But we shouldn't, I guess, knock that in respect of where the future lies. And I think I mentioned it before we started the conversation here about a presentation I saw at BIMAP Oz in Melbourne. I have to shout them out because for their industry, those guys are doing a great job at helping leverage their part of the industry up, and they've done a fantastic job. And every year they put on BIMAP Oz, and the couple of the speakers, and one was a really good example from the US where a mechanical contractor not only became a developer, in inverted commas, a part of the project, but the ability to then reach out using the digital technology and modeling to model a precinct from an energy perspective and create this future state set of buildings, built out of CLT. So it really ticked so many boxes. But the big thing for me was actually seeing these guys. Now they've really come to grips with the technology. Now they're reaching out and pulling other people, pulling developers, pulling owners in, creating a very sustainable built environment outcome. Zero energy building was the ambition. They also came up with concepts around prefabrication of elements for those buildings from an M&E perspective. And so I think the more you work in this, and I still remember back in the day, when I was, on the tools, doing things, and then you start realizing the possibilities by just making a few small changes. And then, so I agree with you. And I guess this is the challenge, as always, in the industry is you've got to have enough, share the vision that people can understand where the possibilities are, but also recognize the challenge for organizations to implement this stuff, right? And you know what it's like. You run a business. If suddenly I pulled your payment or accounting system off you and told you to swap to another one tomorrow, you wouldn't be too happy about that, would you? So,
well, I wouldn't be, because there's a lot of information in there. But but at the same time, I think my mantra on life is always about continual learning.
Yeah,
and I'm very fortunate that there's days when I get to play with different pieces of software, because software vendors, are happy for me to play with their software and test it out and understand it. So from my approach to life, I actually enjoy the kind of, well, I wouldn't enjoy that at all. I want to kill you. But it's that one thing that I think that's missing from this industry. And I personally think my whole mindset has kind of slightly changed after a keynote presentation from Built in March last year, where a change management expert and Dr. Jen Fram presented to us.
Yep.
And it changed my whole mindset from this whole concept of, I actually recognized that my whole career I'd stuffed up.
Oh, confronting.
No, but when you develop kind of world-leading processes that are world-leading in a tool, and you take people along the way, well, you think you are, and you provide them all the training and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
There was never that whole change management piece, which I had no training in whatsoever, had no understanding of change management. I knew how to engage with stakeholders because of my architectural training. You work through and you're briefing and all that sort of stuff, and you develop everything up and you create a masterpiece. But the challenge is that when you're not driving that vehicle anymore and you hand the keys over to someone else, you see where you fail, because people start picking at it and people start wanting to, modify your car. And there's nothing worse than seeing a poorly modified car, right?
That's true.
And I think that it changed my view on the world in terms of my approach to consulting now is about mentoring people on their journey.
Yep.
Rather than doing it for them, going and getting the briefing and building. And otherwise, that whole approach of building for people, I actually think is why we see so much failure in the industry.
I agree with you 100%. I think it is a key learning that I've picked up myself, also the hard way, in that, change management is a very subtle thing. I think that's the point. You want to create the vision for people to understand, what the light on the hill is that you need to be working towards. But you're really there as an enabler to help them understand. And I guess this is part of the problem. We're dealing with some very technical stuff here, and sometimes technical people aren't great at articulating, and sharing that with others. So. And it's very much one thing I'm really conscious of now. It's very much a team effort, right? You want everyone on the bus and you want everyone understanding that, look, I think the key point, back to the original point around change, is you're right. We live in a world, particularly now, where change is inevitable. And I think the point is it's much better to make incremental change gradually and continuous improvement. I'm a big fan of the continuous improvement model rather than the chunky step change, because that's the step change is where the risk lies, right? Where you are trying to, suddenly, someone turns up and says, next week you're going to be using X, like the barriers go up, right? Because everyone knows their day job's hard enough as it is without having to then suddenly go, oh, well, what about this, So incremental change, continuous improvement, the team, the whole change management piece, it's massive, right? And I think people, like you're probably alluding to, don't pay enough attention to how you do that. How do you engage an organization? How do you engage people in an organization? Because the other point last point I want to make about this is that people don't like change. Even I said it earlier, but I think most of us do. We do like the new. There's no questions. All humans like the new, the next thing, right? It's how it's introduced though, and how. So that's where the change management piece is so crucial, right? We all do. We all pretty much love new technology. Like you see people absolutely buried in their devices and consuming content and banking digitally now, and all those things that have been actually incredibly marvelous in the evolution of what technology, like searching, finding songs and entertainment and music and videos from whenever, like things that you'd forgotten about. And I think it's so incredibly powerful, being able to leverage all of that it makes our lives so much more meaningful, engaging with people around the world like at a drop of a hat. Like 20 years ago, it was like a pipe dream, right?
No, that's what I mean. Half of the time I'm on video conference calls with people from all over the world, and it's
fantastic.
And I think COVID's made it even better, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that people are more and more happy to do that. But this would be, I don't think we're going to answer this in this time, and I think we would have to pull out some heavy drinks to answer these questions. But basically what we actually need to come up with is an answer. We need to essentially, the construction industry need to be able to present this digital transformation piece in the same way that Apple markets its iPhone, because everyone races out to get the new iPhone when
good point.
When all it really is these
Don't
days.
diss Apple now. You diss Apple.
all
with a few people offside of you, at least 50% of the population.
All it really is. Well, I'm an Apple phone user as well, but all it really is these days, it's not a phone. It's a camera, right? And so the question being is that for the listeners out there that want to solve the problem that I know that I'm not going to solve and Don's not going to solve in this conversation right now, how can we pitch our digital transition? Because I actually want to forget what BIM. I actually want BIM to be taken away.
Yeah. How
can we actually focus on the concept of getting better quality information management across the whole of our industry? And it's not about kind of, changing everyone overnight. I think the incremental change thing's really interesting. Although at my old practice, I remember one person saying to me, I'm sick of constant change.
Okay.
So for some people, incremental change over long periods of time can also fatigue.
Yeah.
But once again, this was me as a very young member of a large practice, driving change through it without any change management expertise whatsoever. Yeah. And I think that one of the things that really needs to happen moving forward, I think, is that the smaller organizations need to actually have an understanding or invest in change management to enable them to actually move forward. The big organizations, and I've worked with some major multinational consulting firms, and they have the whole change management piece down pat. They have different people that are their role is to do that. They don't need external consultants. They have a person in the organization that makes sure that all this engagement's occurring in the right time, at the right place, with the right people. And it's incredible to watch, but it just doesn't happen. How good would it be if government had change management people in there? I don't know. But I guess once again, it comes down to all of these things. Had they had the resources to roll that policy out, I think we'd see it accelerated right now.
Agree. I think a couple of points I want to pick up on there, which you mentioned. The incremental change piece, I guess what I'd like to bring to the point, back to the point of how we might do this, is we all know in our jobs on a day-to-day basis what we're doing and how we might improve certain things, right? So I guess, and one of the presentations I did see at BIM Epos last week was a key word in all this, I think, is courage, right? The speaker made the point that courage is kind of crucial because it's about change. And like we say, sometimes it's difficult, but if you can motivate in your role for what you're doing in a better way of doing something and don't sit down, like don't just be the silent person in the room, or put your hand up and say something, right? And motivate for an incremental change in what you do. And obviously technology and improved processes is it's all about those things, right? The technology is there. We all know it's well developed. It's well advanced. We can leverage it. I mean, there's obviously there's dollars attached to it, but all the technology that we're seeing pays for itself. When I like really,
if it's used properly,
yeah.
See, that's the problem, right? And this is the other thing about. And I have to come up and think of a dietary requirement or something that would, to tie into the analogy, because, if someone specifically has certain dietary requirements, they shouldn't order a certain type of food, right? So the same thing should be had with BIM. It's like you don't need to order everything because you actually will lose money. And the thing that concerns me the most is that I don't know if I've ever actually seen a true business case behind any BIM implementation or BIM requirement from a client ever.
Yep.
And I don't think
you can do it. I think the example I quoted before where someone did a business case study of us on email and the numbers stacked up that you were saving on the stamps. Right, that was the closest they could get to financial modeling.
Who's going to send that many letters? But I guess
that's what it was, Mike.
Yeah.
Like, if you think about it, that's what email was, and it's even called email, right? It's no one came up with a better name than electronic mail or email.
But no, I do admit though that the Scottish Futures Trust, I think it's called, do have a business case calculator, which I have opened on a couple of occasions, but never really driven it hard enough to see whether or not it was accurate, because I don't know. There's a lot of factors there.
I have to say that is such a great resource. I'm glad you brought it up because, in fact, I was having a look at their website today and some of their content. It's a phenomenal resource for everyone out there to have a look at, like Scottish Futures Trust. Incredible. I can't recall actually having tried to run the business case, but it certainly would give you some great ideas on how to present, a business case. I've got sort of a bit more belligerent in my older age now, and anyone starts arguing with me about a business case, I just go, I slap it down, like going, you can't even, I still recall it like, what is a business case for a mobile phone? No one ever did that, right? It's just an acknowledgement. You look at something and go, that's more efficient, right? It's going to make, it's going to take me less. So that's enough, in my view, to justify what you're doing. But if someone says, we've got to work out if we're in a let's say a design practice, whether we should use modern software to do our design and authoring, I mean, seriously, like is Autodesk and ArchiCAD and all the other softwares out there trying to make the process slower and more inefficient?
Sure. I don't know if we'll talk about that.
Just trying to bait you with a Revit comment there, mate.
No, there's the thing is that there's still a lot of challenges with that open BIM approach. And
absolutely.
I had some really good conversations with some people recently where I went into detail about some of the challenges that are being faced because of the true lack, I guess I would say the true support of open BIM processes, I think. And I don't want to go on that tangent because that becomes a podcast in itself. But
I would agree. It's definitely a podcast on its own.
And I really don't want to start kind of shooting arrows at software vendors, because it becomes that kind of, I'm really over that kind of pissing competition. Yep. At the end of the day, I was explaining to someone the other day, and I said, at the end of the day, all these BIM authoring tools are like, different screwdrivers.
Yeah.
They've all got to drive in a screw somehow. One's a flat blade, one's a Phillips head, and then you might have some of those more specialist ones.
Yeah.
But that's all that they are. They all do the same thing. They might just do things slightly differently, and that's kind of what happens. And there's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there on LinkedIn, which I see some days, and I kind of just go, wow, I'm glad I don't smoke what you're smoking, because there's some really out there theories about software vendors that are really not really appropriate. And in all honesty, the one thing that I have to say about software is that anyone that actually understands anything about software development, the whole approach with the way that they work is a minimum viable product.
Yes, it's a very interesting point, isn't it?
They deliver a minimum viable product. What is the least that they have to deliver to make the market still purchase their software? And I've gone now on this journey, which I said I wouldn't. So that's a really big naughty thing. But moving on to, we're both based here in Brisbane. Exciting thing happening, in 11 years, or 11, in 9 years' time. Wow. We'll see the Olympics here in Brisbane. I'm excited because there's going to be some great transformation. I'm really disappointed actually that they're actually upgrading the Gabba. I think that's the biggest.
That's a hot topic.
That's the biggest mistake that they've made.
Well, you see, there's been somewhat of a parliamentary revolt on that. I don't know if you kept up with that.
They finally read my article.
maybe they did read your article, but there's certainly a move in crossbench around opposition to that significant spend on the Gabba. And I think I would tend to agree with your article that the money could be certainly spent better elsewhere. And yeah, subject of probably another podcast, quite honestly. But I think that's a constructive debate we need to have in industry, right? Let's have those kind of open, constructive debates rather than, we've made a decision and this is how it's going to be. I think there needs to be a little bit more transparency and openness and frank conversation around what does the city want, what do Queenslanders want, right? And obviously you can't have it like have a referendum for every single bit of infrastructure development, but I think, a bit more vision setting around what this might look like and a bit more engagement with the public will go a long way to like on a large scale of what we were talking about earlier, change management, because that's really what it is.
Yeah.
How do you get support for it?
Well, that's where politicians have a lot of advisors, right? But the key thing being is that here in Queensland now they've moved light years ahead in New South Wales and Victoria with digital twin initiatives, and just recently we've seen a digital twin team being formed here in Queensland under the Queensland government, and the concerns that I have with this approach is I like the comment you made earlier about the strategic vision of kind of there's the goal setting of where we're heading. Yeah. But from my perspective, I haven't actually seen any CDE set up or any container naming strategies put in place by the Queensland government agencies as of today, or from my knowledge, from what I've seen out and about.
Well, TMR, Transport and Main Roads, yes.
Oh yeah, Mr. McSweeney, yes, he does have his naming.
Great job there and George, and they've certainly, I think, again, a really good example of pragmatic, practical implementation. Under the blanket of, and let's not beat around the bush, right? It's a challenge in working in government agency with all the various stakeholders and various sub-departments and all that. It's a huge challenge to think the wheels turn slowly, and they turn slowly for a reason, right? So I think sort of big kudos to them, and certainly have seen, some great initiatives by them, codifications and all that sort of stuff. I think, really good. But, and we know that there's been some significant work done in the health arena.
Recently, yeah.
So look, I think everything's heading towards it's just how do we really get traction? And I guess going back to the point I made before is it's up to all of us, right? All of us working in the industry have the courage, have those frank conversations, push it. Don't what was that saying about all change is caused by an unreasonable person, right? So you've got to be a little bit unreasonable, and don't be the yes person in the room. Keep agitating and keep pushing everyone, challenging, and let's be sensible about it. Of course, you're not going to lose your job over it. but I think that's what we live in a democracy, and we need to you need to make your voice heard, not just at the ballot box. You need to make your voice heard through the industry bodies that you belong to. And I certainly know that there's obviously some other common threads out there. Construction industry is in a lot of pain at the moment. And, another ACA have sort of raised their voice and upped the ante in conversations around, particularly with large clients, government agencies, around, an improved model of delivery. And I think, this all fits into that same common thread as because what we're talking about is basically how do we do business more effectively? How do we create a vision? How do we get buy-in from stakeholders? And modeling and data, and how do we become more efficient at delivering what all of us want in our communities, right? Better infrastructure, better built environment, more cost effective. Build 3 schools for the price of one. I mean that could be a great dream, but I mean I'm certainly imagining you could get the numbers to stack up for that, but you're going to have to cut a lot of red tape. and you're going to have to bash a few heads together to make that happen. But it certainly would be achievable, right?
Oh, of course it would be. But I guess moving on to my final thought for our chat today, and the kind of main presentation kind of topic that I've focused on for kind of some of my industry presentations this year has been we have BIM doing it all wrong.
Yep.
And it was a presentation I gave at the Future Infrastructure Summit, and it's a presentation I'll be giving later this year virtually as part of the BIM Coordinator Summit that's based in Ireland. So I won't be traveling to Ireland to deliver it face-to-face, but delivering it virtually. And some of the things that I feel about the industry right now in terms of, that whole thing about, being gluttonous for data and unnecessary data. The final kind of piece I guess I want to touch upon, which doesn't kind of cover off on the whole journey, is the kind of concept where people are asking for, as constructed models.
Yes.
Of everything. They kind of want this digital thing. Now, I've been involved in specifying deliverables for my 20-year career in terms of handover information.
Yep.
And most of the time you get the design drawings marked up and just put a lovely title block of the subcontractor that did it in AutoCAD and away they go, and they just print them out and put them in the set. Now,
the industry's dirty little secret.
Well, but that's
as-builts.
But the as-builts are. But the thing is this verification thing taking it to that nth level because of the fact that they've had these issues where the as constructed never actually reflected what was built? Could that be the case?
I actually don't think so, because the industry's tolerated as-built, poor quality as-built since forever and a day, as I understand it.
Oh, you haven't seen my specs, mate. No, in all honesty, I worked with a client that was an asset owner.
Yes.
So it wasn't a developer.
That's unusual, you see.
So they own the asset, and it was a site where there would be work done in stages. So they get funding for one stage, they construct it, then 2 years later they'll get funding for another stage. So critical information.
And they knew how vital that was for their developments, right?
Well, it's critical to know where all your subterranean services are, because that's the most costly risk you have in terms of latent conditions on a site, where you have an as constructed that isn't actually as constructed.
Yeah.
Now we had a very detailed surveying requirement stipulated in our preliminaries about how the as constructed for subterranean conditions were to be provided.
Yeah.
Now, all that was doing was kind of reinforcing with the contractor and the subcontractors that were building it that they had to be very specific and accurate with what they were delivering with that.
Yeah.
Is this whole drive for these, verified as constructed models possibly just an approach by people saying, well, I've never had reliable as built information. I want it to be reliable now. Or is it just, once again, the inexperience of the person specifying it, and they're just saying, you know what, because we want to do this BIM, we want to have this BIM project, we want to have everything and the bells and whistles?
There's definitely a lot of the latter for sure. I think the challenge is that, and I mean, an example would be you could capture particularly in-ground stuff, right, and using different technology, right, and you'd be able to provide it probably in a format that would be far more useful to the asset owner than a marked up drawing, right? So I guess there's an example of where maybe more discussion's needed rather than someone saying, I want an as-built model and drawings, and how do you verify it? I think there's actually not a huge amount of people in the industry that are great at working out, let's call it the technology or the process by which you would capture that. Like, so a lot of people, as you probably be aware, when they talk about as-built modeling, they expect that someone's going to go out and scan a facility and then do a scan to BIM exercise and convert that into an as-built model. And I guess, in my view, it's a complete waste of time in most cases. What you do want, though, is obviously a level of, it's not millimeter. In most cases, it's not millimeter accuracy. Like, it's very rare that you actually need millimeter accuracy. Like, do I really need to know where a GPO has been put in a room to the nearest 100 millimeters? Not necessarily. Like, what's the value? But I do want to know is that there are 3 GPOs in the room and they're all on that wall. Right?
Yes. Yep.
So again, I guess that's where I think a little bit more sophistication in the specifications that you're talking about, or requirements, will lead to a much greater value. Like, have a frank discussion and go, like, in grounds, mate, if it's within 300 millimeters or half a meter of where you say it is, that's probably more than enough accuracy. No one's going to go and start drilling holes, closer than half a meter to an in-ground HV cable, right? So
You'd hope not.
No. So as long as you know that it's and obviously we're probably not talking about 300 mil, but people that go on about millimeter accuracy and scanning those, it's like pointless to scan. You really want to know the exact. It's usually a bundle of conduits as well.
Yep.
So we just want to know that there's a zone there that it's of this size and nature, and it contains this asset, and it goes from here to here, right? And then you can see the lids, and you can go, okay, well, great, and it does this bend over there or whatever. So I would, in principle, absolutely agree with what you're saying. Like, we need, again, it's the same story what you said before. There's too much gluttony going on. Let's just keep it simple and get real and get practical about what's needed, and then you might find a lot more people get on the bandwagon.
I think that's the perfect way to close out today's discussion, Don. I think we'd have come up with a new T-shirt, Glutton BIM. Instead of the Glastonbury Festival, call it the Glutton BIM Festival.
The Gluttony BIM Festival.
Oh, that's a perfect one. But Don, mate, thanks very much for your time today.
My pleasure, Nathan. Always a pleasure having a chat with you.
And one final question, mate, and it'll be good to go back and listen to your feelings in the 2 previous episodes that we've had you on for this. But in 2023, Don, what does BIM mean to you?
Ooh.
You knew it was coming.
I think it's like what you said before. I want to forget about BIM now. I want to just assume it's happening. And we need to be talking about how do we leverage it.
Yeah,
make my life easier. That's what I keep saying.
Don't we wish that would be the case? The thing is that you're still fighting fires every day, isn't it?
Yep.
It doesn't change. You take away BIM and you fortify it every day in the projects that you're delivering, and now you're just fighting different fires, different colours maybe, I don't know.
Different levels, different layers.
Different classification fires, right?
Yes, that too.
All right, Don. Thanks very much for your time, mate.
My pleasure. Thank you, Nathan.
So for more information on Don, please head over to the podcast section of the Skewed website for further reading. I look forward to sharing our next podcast with you in a fortnight's time. Until then, good luck with your digital transition, powered by Bond University's Building Information Modelling program. Digital transition.